Hi, my name is Dr. John Douillard and welcome to LifeSpa.com. When I first traveled to India back in 1986, I was doing research on nose breathing, particularly nose breathing exercise versus mouth breathing exercise. And I started digging into all of the research, and what I found when I was there was many studies talking about how, infantry in the army that were nose breathers never got sick compared to the ones who were mouth breathers. And how parents would teach their kids how to kind of lie on their side and tuck their chin and make sure that they were nose breathers. And it was a tradition, a well understood tradition, that keeping your mouth closed was really important for development of mental function and respiratory capacity in all these things. So fast forward, and now we have issues with kids. The vast majority of teeth are crooked, almost as a rite of passage. Teenagers get their wisdom teeth pulled out. There's a heck of a lot of research now suggesting that doesn't have to happen. I always felt like that was really strange. Why do we have wisdom teeth if we're supposed to pull them out? It doesn't make any sense. That never happened in the history of the world. Why now? And it turns out that there's a lot of reasons, and one of those reasons is because, we don't chew things any longer. We don't chew hard to digest foods. We chew like, eggs and toast or whatever, and you can inhale it basically and swallow it without chewing anything. And that creates a weakness in the muscles of our jaw, and it actually creates a change in the structure of the jaw, the face, and the palate. And as a result of that, the palate starts to become more V-shaped. Instead of being kind of rounded and soft and flat on top, in the upper palate in your mouth becomes more V-shaped. And when it becomes V-shaped, the airways that we breathe through become much smaller, significantly smaller. When they did studies with ancient skulls versus modern skulls just 400 years ago. This is research done by in the book called Breath by James Nestor, who I did a podcast on. You got to read that book. It's just a phenomenal book. And they were studies of these ancient skulls, and all these skulls had airways that were just twice the size, and mouths and jaws that were wider as opposed to longer. And there were studies where they took chimpanzees and they put plugs up their nose for a year, and they couldn't breathe through their nose. They had to breathe only through their mouth, and their jaws became more narrow and longer. Then when they took the plugs out, they started getting sleep apnea and a whole bunch of kind of cognitive issues and functional emotional issues and things like that. So when they took the plugs out, their jaws widened. They started breathing through their nose the way they were designed to breathe, as we are designed to breathe. But because of years of chewing or not chewing and eating soft food, and what happens when your airways start to close because your jaw becomes longer and more narrow, there's no room for your teeth. So your teeth can't grow in straight. So they pull them out or they straighten them. Now, back in the 1800s, one dentist created a device called a monoblock, where it actually was a palate expander, where they actually put these little screws on this little kind of device that would open and widen your palate. And that was back in the 1800s. And orthodontics was basically based on widening and making the mouth bigger, as opposed to pulling and straightening teeth, which started happening in the 1940s. And ever since then, it's just been old school, one-size-fits-all dentistry. Just kind of wire them up, bring them in, pull out the teeth that don't fit, and you're good to go. And unfortunately, that's why we have the rite of passage where kids get their wisdom teeth pulled out. So there's this whole new age, which is very exciting for parents, something called functional orthodontics, where using certain devices like the homeoblock, which is a modern day version of a palate expander, to kind of open up the palate and actually widen the jaw, and really add bone to the jaw, over time, which can actually happen, and science shows that happens even as far as to the age of like 70 years old. So we can always add more bone. You put stress on that palate, it'll actually open up and widen, which is also, tied to my nose breathing research, because when you actually basically have a smaller, more narrow jaw and a smaller airway, the only way to breathe is use the big opening, which is your mouth, to get the air in, so become mouth breathers and snorers at night, which leads to sleep apnea and a host of concerns, including attention deficit and cognitive issues as well. So all of a sudden, all these things get connected to become a very, very real concern. And nose breathing is critical. I've written about articles about nose breathing. Gosh, my whole professional career, we did research on nose breathing versus mouth breathing. We published those studies. Taping your mouth closed at night, I've written articles about that, to make sure you breathe through your mouth at night. Really, really important, because when you close your mouth, your tongue gets stuck to the roof of the mouth, and it puts pressure on the palate, and it keeps it widened. And that's why when you plug your nose and you breathe through your mouth, there's nothing keeping that jaw from becoming more narrow and more longer. And they say when it gets wider and more of a strong jaw and a wider palate, you're more beautiful. Supposedly. So that's something as well. So in the article associated with this video, I list all the different types of devices or appliances you can put into your mouth to create a palate spreader. You can look up functional orthodontics in your area to see where you can go. Dr. John Mew in the late 1960s was a maverick doctor outside of London who created a device called the BioBlock, mostly for kids, and that's what you want to do, is get this palate expansion happening when their kids are really young, so you can avoid dentist braces and teeth pulling extractions and all of that. So you can look up some of his work. He has a technique now called mewing. His son has created a technique called mewing, where you actually do an exercise with your mouth. They have a mewing appliance where you use your tongue to kind of push up against your palate and force your tongue to kind of up and expand and push your jaw more forward. And that's something you can look into as well. And there's other techniques that I thought were really interesting as you kind of dig around into the world of functional orthodontics, as opposed to just putting braces on and extracting. There's a technique called advanced light wave or ALF or ALF. And that's where they actually put a little thin wire on the inside of your jaw, and it's based on the science of osteopathy, the original osteopathy created by Andrew Still, who created osteopathy back in, I think it was in Missouri somewhere, Kirksville, I think, and it's based on the cranial rhythm and that the original osteopaths used to bring balance to the whole body. And this little device really seems minimally invasive, something to look at. Again, it's all about the cranial rhythm. It's just a thin wire. So there's lots of things you can do with your children, and even as adults. The HomeoBlock you can use as an adult. Exercise you can do, nose breathing you can do. So many things you can do. And if you're not sure if you have a palate that needs that, you can take your thumb and put it on the roof of your mouth. And if that should be sort of flat up there. It shouldn't be pointed like that. It should be a nice flat area up there. And that's the palate, and that means it's wide enough. When it starts to become narrow, it starts to become more V-shaped, and that's what you don't want. So you can actually kind of open that palate up, and when that palate opens, your airways open, and you can start breathing the way we were designed, and prevent things like sleep apnea, snoring, certain types of cognitive issues, and it allows you to breathe the way we were designed. All right, so please check out this article. This is really important stuff. Read the book Breath by James Nestor. Watch my podcast with him, which is coming out very soon. Thanks for listening. I'm Dr. John Douillard. Do you like this video? Don't forget to subscribe and share.
This recording is brought to you by LifeSpa, where ancient Ayurvedic wisdom meets modern science. Get access to free health video newsletters by Dr. John at lifespa.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.